Today we will be looking at Langston Hughes's A Dream Deferred. A Dream Deferred is Langston Hughes's best work, and has had a huge impact on the culture at the time of its creation. To begin, let's read the poem aloud. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? So now that we've read the poem, we have to look at a few things to try to discover the meaning of the poem. We have to look at when the poem was written, who the author of the poem is, what the poem's meaning is, and how we get that meaning through literary devices used in the poem. The Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance came about in the 1920s and 30s. This was the time that the poem was created. It was a time of cultural revolution in African Americans all over the country, centered in Harlem, New York. It was the African American center for changes in things like literature, art, and music that celebrated their culture at the time. Origins of the Harlem Renaissance. In the decades immediately following World War I, large numbers of African Americans migrated north to the industrial north from the economically depressed and agricultural south. There were no opportunities in the south, and the industrial north afforded many more jobs. In cities like Chicago, Washington, D.C., and New York City, the recently migrated African Americans sought and found, to some degree, new opportunities. The African Americans were encouraged to celebrate their heritage. This black urban migration, combined with the experimental trends occurring throughout the 1920s American society, and the rise of a group of radical black intellectuals, all contributed to their particular styles and unprecedented success as black artists. That led to a huge explosion of African American music, art, literature, unlike what has been seen before. The legacy of the Harlem Renaissance opened doors and deeply influenced the generations of African American writers that followed. Now on to Langston Hughes. James Langston Hughes was born on February 1st, 1902 in Joplin, Missouri. His parents divorced when he was a small child, and his father moved to Mexico. When he was 13, he moved to Lincoln, Illinois, to live with his mother and her husband. It was in Lincoln, Illinois that Hughes began writing poetry. After graduating high school, he spent a year in Mexico and a year at Columbia University. In November of 1924, he moved to Washington, D.C. In 1926, Hughes's first book, The Weary Blues, was published. He finished his college education at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania 3 years later. In 1930, his first novel, Not Without Laughter, won the Harmon Gold Medal for literature. Hughes is known for his insightful, colorful portrayals of black life in America from the 20s through the 60s. He wrote novels, short stories, and plays, as well as more poetry. He is also known for his engagement in the world of jazz and the influences it had on his writing. His life and work were enormously important in shaping the artistic contributions of the Harlem Renaissance in the 20s. Hughes refused to differentiate himself and his personal experiences from the common experience of Black America. Hughes died in 1967 of prostate cancer. Hughes portrayed the stories of his people in ways that reflected their actual culture, including both their suffering and their love of music, laughter, and language. He portrayed the typical life of an African American in the North in his work. His work involved the world of jazz and was influential. His personal life and common African American experience are present themes in all of his works. His work is known for being an accurate description of Black culture, suffering, music, and language. Now that we understand a little more about the background of the author and the time period that inspired the poem, we try to reach a theme in the poem. We reach theme by analyzing parts of the poem, looking at the poem line by line, and looking at the literary devices and meaning. First off, what literary devices are used in the poem? This is the part of the discussion when I would allow students to give examples of literary devices before I showed them what I came up with. We reach theme by analyzing the poem line by line and looking at the different literary devices and meanings. Literary devices include imagery, such as fester like a sore. Rhetorical question, what happens to a dream deferred? Simile, which is a comparison using like or as, such as the line, like a raisin in the sun. Rhyme, such as the rhymes between load and explode in the lines, maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? And diction, or word choice, such as dream deferred. This poem has a large use of rhetorical question. This is where I would discuss with students what a rhetorical question occurs in the poem and what they mean. For thought, how can a dream dry up, fester like a sore, stink like rotten meat, crust and sugar over, sag like a heavy load, or explode? Word choice is also important in such a short poem. What does the author mean by the word dream? What does he mean by deferred? And to put it together, what happens when dreams are deferred? Another literary device used is rhythm. Rhythm is the flow or cadence of the writing in a poem. It's how the poem sounds when you read it. So let's read the poem aloud again. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? What does this sound like? Does it sound jazzy, such as the music in the background? Why would that be important? These can be used to discover theme. This is the part where I would discuss with the students what they think the theme of the poem is before I would give them mine. My meaning of the poem is that having to postpone one's deepest desires can lead to destruction. But what does this actually mean? And what is this important in the Harlem Renaissance? And how can we apply this theme to our lives? This is where I would discuss with students what the theme of the poem means individually. In the Harlem Renaissance, this poem encouraged African Americans to dream, and it gave them hope. African Americans could now take advantage of new opportunities in the North. By doing this, they were breaking free of the racial struggles they had experienced prior to the 1920s. The theme is also important to readers today. It encourages us to follow our dreams and pursue whatever will make us happy. Hughes is telling us to take risks to follow our dreams because no risk is as bad as giving up on our dreams. If you miss your dreams, you will miss life opportunities that you will regret later.